Welcome back. Scott here from The Awakened Heart. And thank you, Jesse. That was a beautiful, beautiful teaching. I really appreciate it. I want to thank you for being here, for joining us and taking time out of your busy life to hear what Jesse and I have to share. I'm going to pick up kind of where Jesse left off and talk a little bit about the union of emptiness and appearance, and how understanding emptiness and appearances and their indivisible nature can help us live a life that's happier, that's more centered, that's connected to experiences of joy and bliss and contentment that are trustworthy, that we can rely on, that we can open up into, rest in, and heal in. We talk in Buddhism a lot about entering the path through the gate of suffering. And that's where a lot of us find our way to the Dharma. And I know Jesse's had a lot of difficult experiences. I share that path. That was my entry into the Buddhist path, into spiritual work. Where I suffered terribly with feelings of depression and suicidal ideation and substance abuse. I really viewed myself as an independent being, as me, existing in an outer world that was threatening and dangerous and unsafe and unsupportive, and that did not nurture me or protect me. And I developed a number of self-protective mechanisms of thinking and acting and belief systems to protect me from the onslaught of this dangerous external environment. And that was necessary to some extent and helpful to some extent, but eventually those very mechanisms and structures that I created to protect my tender heart became the bars of the cage in which I lived and which I could not escape from. And I found myself trapped in them. And this, of course, led to suffering. And then the desire to escape from that suffering in a reliable way, like not escape through alcohol or drugs or distraction or any of the other things that Jesse talked about. We look in the outer world first for the sources of our freedom, for the sources of our happiness. But we are reliably let down by reliance on those outer forms because they do not reflect true reality. They are a reflection of what our confused mind projects outward, and that's what we interact with. So because they're not related to the truth, they're not related to basic reality, they are untrustworthy and they don't provide the benefit that we are seeking in them. And so Jesse talked about renunciation as the beginning of the path. And I think that's totally accurate. We have to see and reach the sense of frustration within ourselves that, okay, all of my coping modalities are ineffective. They're just not working. So I need to be willing to let go of them, to release them, and try something new and see if that can help us. So in the Buddhist teachings, we're instructed on how to understand both outer reality and the inner reality in a new way. And that the key to that is what we call emptiness. And I think in the beginning, we think of emptiness as nothingness, as a void, as the absence of everything. And that's not at all what we're talking about in the Buddhist approach. Emptiness instead in the Buddhist approach refers to the lack of an inherent independent existence of external objects. So what does that mean? right? We all see external objects. I'm sitting at a table, I'm looking into a camera, we're in an Airstream camper. These are external objects, right? And they are there, they exist, they manifest. We're not saying that they're not here. But what we're invited to do in the Buddhist approach is to carefully analyze the way in which those outer phenomena appear. So the thing that appears to me to be a table, the thing that appears to me to be this Airstream, the thing that appears to be the human being that appears to be Jesse sitting across from me, do they exist in the way that my mind is telling me that they do? And through rigorous inquiry, we discover the fact that things aren't exactly the way that they appear to us, right? And we can look at this just first of all from a scientific rationalist perspective. We know that this table is mostly made up of atoms. Atoms are 99.999999% empty space. And then what's not empty space are subatomic particles. And what are they? They are energetic vibrations. So we can know that even though we can't see it and relate to it in that way, if we had, say, quantum vision, or we had the ability to see on an atomic structure, everything would be boundaryless. There would be no fixed boundary between one object and another object. Everything is just the flow of interrelated energetic frequencies. So that's one way to think about it. Things aren't the way that they appear to us. First, from a scientific perspective, they don't actually have that reality. Secondly, when we think about the visual system and the auditory system, our senses, we sort of have this idea that we have an accurate representation of the outer world that's given to us through our sensory perceptions. So I see an apple, it's red, it's right here. That's what's being represented to my mind by my visual system. And I think that that's an accurate representation of outer reality. But again, if we go back to that scientific view of what's going on in our neural processing systems, there's no actual projector and room inside of our brain where that image lives and exists. There's no light that penetrates beyond the retina. It's all electrochemical signaling. So everything that our brain takes in and then represents is conducted through this electrochemical magic. So we don't actually see an apple. We get electrochemical signals in our brain that represent that apple. And that's true for all outer phenomenon. And that's true for auditory phenomenon as well. So we can look at it in a non-woo-woo, non-philosophical way, just that we do sort of live in a matrix-like projection of an outer environment that isn't truly what's there. It's just a representation. So I'm going to give a quote from Heart Advice from a Mahamudra master, which was written by Gendon Rinpoche. He's a really beautiful teacher who's connected strongly within my lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And he has a very clear way of describing this. He says, "The world in which we find ourselves is a projection of our mind. Our previous actions have created tendencies in our mind that cause it to project a particular kind of world. But this world does not exist in reality." So this is a quote that's come not from a scientific investigation of outer phenomenon and inner phenomenon and neural processing, but this has arisen from his own meditation experience, his own observation of the nature of his mind and the nature of external phenomenon as they appear. He goes on to say, "All the thoughts and feelings we identify with have as little reality as dream experiences. As long as their minds are caught in delusion and ignorance, the beings in the various realms of existence will experience suffering of limitless intensity and duration. So this is why understanding emptiness and getting to a deeper awareness of what emptiness really is, in some ways is the key to unlocking the door to our own happiness and to abandoning our way of being that has led to so much suffering in our lives. It isn't that we want to see the world as an illusion or as a dream in order to escape from its ugly aspects, but we want to relate to reality as it is. We want to be honest and directly with what is. But in order to do that, we have to understand the nature of that. When we begin to explore emptiness and we begin to get a taste for it and sense that what is presented to us through the gates of our senses isn't as real and as solid as we believe it to be, that's the first step. And the second step is to understand and expand that awareness to, as Jesse pointed out, to our thoughts, our feelings, our emotional substrate, our core experience of what it is to be us inside that environment. That's equally empty. It's not a solid thing. We are not a solidly existing independent self in an empty environment. Both the outer environment is empty and the inner core created identity is equally empty. And this means that we have more freedom than it appears to us when we're locked in that solidly existing concept of the outer world and our inner experience. I'd like to share a little bit about how my own understanding of that came about initially. And this was while I was in retreat, and I had a dream about my wife. And in this dream, she was really terrible to me. She hated me, she saw right through me, and she decided that she never wanted anything to do with me again. And this broke my heart. And I woke up and I was just so sad. I was completely wrecked. But then I realized that was just a dream. That's not real. It felt real, right? I had the experience. There was no difference in my internal experience between this fantasy, this dream that I had that my wife treated me in this way, and if she had actually done it. The pain that I felt was exactly the same. And for some reason, probably because I was in retreat and I was primed for this, I recognized, oh my goodness, I was relating to a mental projection in that dream. There was no basis for reality in that person that I interacted with and who said these terrible things to me and who broke my heart. And when I woke up, they were gone. They didn't exist. They never existed in the way that I thought that they did. And then I carried that another step forward. And I thought about all the times that we had actual fights in actual real life in our relationship, and how many times I had, really gotten carried away with anger and rage and feeling unheard and unlistened to. I recognized that the person that I was fighting with in every single one of those fights was not my wife. It wasn't her at all. It was my internal projection of who I thought she was that I was relating to. It had as little connection to reality as my dream did. So that was the first taste for me of understanding, oh, that's what this emptiness is kind of all about. And then I was able to take it another step forward and realize, okay, in that dream, my wife, that wife figure, was a representation, completely unreal. But it isn't the case that there was a real me in that dream either. The me that was in that dream that was experiencing all of those things was equally, completely a manifestation of what? Mind. My mind. My mind created the me, it created the her, and it created the whole outer environment and the whole drama. It was all generated by the mind. And that's how things are. Not just in dream consciousness, but in waking consciousness. It's exactly the same. Those things that appear to us to be real and that we relate to as real have that power to harm us or help us because we give it to them. We give it to them by believing in them and anchoring them into a reality that they don't possess intrinsically or inherently. So this is what I think is worth really exploring. And this is the ground for the beginning of our exploration of the unity of emptiness and appearances. When we can sever our identification with that internally generated I, the egoic sense of I'm this person, I have these feelings, I have these thoughts, this is what's important to me. We don't have to destroy that entity. We don't have to eradicate it. We simply step out of ownership role of that activity. And we identify with what Jesse called pure awareness, naked awareness. That naked awareness is free from conceptual frameworks. It's free from emotional experiences. It's free from whatever mental obscurations or emotional obscurations, emotional trauma patterns that exist within the egoic self. The naked awareness aspect of our true selves is free from all of those. It's not completely free of characteristics, however. It does have the characteristic of luminosity, of inherent bliss and joyfulness. It's a positive feeling tone, and it's limitless, and it's bright, and it's flawless, and it's uncreated, and it's unceasing. It never changes. It's the only thing in all of appearance that doesn't ever change. The way that I like to look at it as a mirror and its reflection, right? So in a mirror, everything that's out there is reflected perfectly, but there are not any of those external objects inside the mirror itself, and they don't adhere to the mirror itself. They are mirror reflections. So we can look into the mirror and see everything, all the world of appearances. We can see all emotions, all forms, all suffering, all joy, all bliss, all confusion, and yet none of it affects the mirror itself. And the mirror does not tweak any of those appearances, right? It doesn't accept or reject. It just reflects reality. Whatever appears in front of the mirror is reflected in the mirror with complete clarity, precision, and no distortion. That's who we are. That's our basic nature. And our whole journey on the path is one of extricating ourselves from identification with the small self and sort of moving into that mirror-like self that reflects everything and accepts everything and is free from any suffering whatsoever. So Gendron Rinpoche talks about this. He says, although the Buddha nature is present within us, so this is what he's calling Buddha nature, this inherent, naked, pristine awareness. Although the Buddha nature is present within us, we do not see it because it is covered in obscurations that stand in the way of our mind recognizing its true nature. These obscurations are the result of self-centered actions that we have performed with our body, speech, and mind since beginningless time. So that's our basic conundrum. That's our basic issue. We intrinsically have everything that we need for our awakening. We have everything that we need right now to live a life that's centered in joy, bliss, equanimity, openness, and engagement with the world, not retreat from the world. But that nature is not available to us 100%. It's covered over. It's covered over by our confusion. It's covered over by our lack of wisdom. It's covered over by our grasping at things that we want. It's covered over by our pushing away and rejection of things that we don't want. And it's covered over by our basic ignorance, which is much bigger and more vast than either our grasping or our pushing away, right? If you think about the field of ignorance, it's limitless. It's completely limitless. So what are we to do? What are we to do with this situation? We're caught in the confusion that we find ourselves in, this confusion that we have created for ourselves, not just in this lifetime, but in the Buddhist view, since beginningless time. We have always been confused. We have always had our Buddha nature covered over by these obscurations, because if there had been a time earlier when we had uncovered them, we would be Buddhas now. So that obviously didn't happen. It has happened for some beings, but for us, where we are right now, we're still in this state where our basic nature is covered over by these veils and obscurations. And so it's pretty simple. We just need to begin the work of removing those veils, removing that confusion, removing those errors. So we're not, in the Buddhist view, we're not creating something. I'm not turning myself into a Buddha. I'm not aspiring to become something that I'm not, something that's distant from me, something that's distant from me in space or in time or in capacity. We're talking about activating our own innate gifts, our own innate nature, and engaging with a very methodical and realistic and hopeful process of just removing the garbage, taking away those things that come between us and the recognition of our true selves. And I want to talk a little bit about how we do this, right? How do we implement this in our daily life, exactly as we are and where we are? Because I think that's really important. We need to be able to relate skillfully to our situation right now. So the first step, I think, for us is to have the courage of a fundamental kind of honesty. We have to be honest with ourselves that our mechanisms and our behaviors are not skillful and they're not helpful to us. And we know this, right? A huge part of our behavior is really designed to distract us from the recognition of our role in the suffering that we see in the world, the suffering that we experience and the suffering that we impose upon those who are near and dear to us, right? Because those are the people that we make suffer the most. We don't make strangers suffer because they don't care what we have to say. Who we make suffer are our spouses and our children and our parents and our siblings and our best friends. And really, we don't want to do that anymore. So it starts with a willingness to say, okay, I'm confused. And I'm engaged in actions that are harmful. And I want to change that. And then we need to stop there, right? We want to stop with a recognition. Okay, this is what's going on. I was confused. I have been confused. And as a result of that confusion, I've acted unskillfully and I've caused harm to myself and others. But I don't want to keep going on. That means I'm bad. That means I'm beyond salvation and I should feel guilty and terrible. And I'm going to just descend into this morass of self-pity and shame. Well, that's not going to fix anything. That's not going to change our behavior. That's not going to help. We're just looking for a clear-eyed recognition that what we have done in the past hasn't been skillful. And then even right now, I don't necessarily need to know how to do everything skillfully yet. I can start with motivation. I can start with aspiration. I can start with the heartfelt desire, which I nurse and express through all the actions of my body, speech, and mind. I want to do better. I want to be a force for good in the world. I want to cause no harm. That's at least, if I can't do good, at least I can stop causing harm. And I do want to feel better. I want to be loving and kind and happy. And I want to share that love and happiness and kindness with everyone that I encounter. I don't know how to do it yet, but that's my goal. That's what I'm going to start shooting for. And just that, those two pieces, recognition of where we're starting from, and then making an aspiration for that to change, is like a rescue line that we can start pulling in and directing all of our actions towards that orientation. And then it's just a process of picking up our path and engaging with the practices that that path teaches us as a means to more ethical behavior, more skillful behavior, and a more open and honest relationship with basic reality, things as they are. So we talk about appearances not really being the way that we think that they are. The way that they seem to be to us is not the way that they are. They are more like this dream. They're a projection. They're a false creation in a way. And this gives us this freedom to not relate to them as these solidly heavy, independent, eternally existing objects that can obstruct us, but they're more open, they're more playful. We know they're going to arise, they're going to abide for a period of time, and then they're going to pass away, and a new appearance will arise, and we'll relate to that, and it will be there for a while, and then it will pass away, and another appearance will arise. We're the mirror, and these objects just keep appearing in the mirror. So we don't need to take ownership of them. We don't need to intervene in the ways in which they appear. We can just relate to them with an open heart. But we don't want to fall into the extreme of believing that because they have an empty aspect, that they're not real, that they don't exist in any way, that they're just an illusion, because that's not true either. These appearances are our reality. So even though they're empty of a fundamental, independent, standalone existence, they are our reality. They are 100% what is available for us to interact with. So they are both empty and they appear. And this union is indivisible. And this is how every single thing expresses itself. I am the union of emptiness and appearance. You are the union of emptiness and appearance. If we talk about in the analogy of the mirror, right? I'm the mirror. I'm not the things that appear in it. I'm not the small self. I'm not the small I. I'm the stainless mirror that only reflects reality. But that reality is also the mirror. When you're looking at the mirror, the things that you're seeing that are represented to you by the reflection are the intrinsic quality of the mirror itself. They are indivisible. What does that mean? That means that we exist as the union of all appearances. Everything that arises is us. We are everything that arises. There's absolutely no division. There's no dividing line that can ever be found or established between what we consider to be ourselves and what we consider to be the outer world or our inner world. And to me, this is the key to our liberation and our freedom, because we are that which we see. Everything that we encounter, everything that we experience is us, is our basic, truest nature. And so we can have a really friendly approach to outer experiences. There's nothing to fear. There's nothing foreign. There's nothing unknowable. It's our basic nature. And we can begin to relate to the world as our teacher, as our guru, from which we are indivisible. And everything becomes like water poured into water, all one taste. And when we touch into that, we really have opened the door to our freedom. And it doesn't mean that we're completely enlightened at that point. It's more like we have the first understanding of who and what we are and where we are. And then it's from that position that we can begin to unpack more and more our connection to basic reality, our connection to who and what we are, and our dance with a world that's vibrantly alive, that is full of every potentiality that could ever be expressed. It's being expressed in this direct moment to and with us as aspects of who and what we are. So, what does Lama Gendon say about this? When we become aware of the nature of delusion, the veils of dualistic attachment dissolve, and we arrive at the awakened dimension, the knowledge of the empty nature of all appearances. That's what I was just talking about. So what do we do? This path of meditation. Gendon Rinpoche tells us, we meditate until we recognize that appearance and mind are inseparable. Then it becomes clear to us that it would be senseless or even harmful to block the appearances and perceptions that arise in our mind, since that would entail suppressing the natural movement of the mind. Similarly, we do not need to artificially generate an experience of emptiness. By recognizing appearances as projection of our mind, everything we experience is the expression of our own mind. Mind and manifestation are one and the same. They are not separated in the least. Just as the mind is not an object that can be described or delimited, so the appearances that the mind projects are also beyond all imagination and description. I'm going to read that again. Just as the mind is not an object that can be described or delimited, so the appearances that the mind projects are also beyond all imagination and description. This really resonates for me today and always, because through my meditation experience and through the work that I've done on the spiritual path, this is how I experience the world. It's a radiant, limitless, luminous field of play in which everything is welcome. It doesn't mean that every experience is pleasant, right? Plenty of the experiences that arise are very unpleasant. There's still death, there's still grief, there's still loss, separation, frustration, anger, anxiety. Everything that was in samsara before is still vividly present in the world of appearances. But we have this taste, this understanding that our own mind is everything that appears. So our own mind is beyond our ability to understand. Like, we can't build a conceptual framework that's going to encompass infinity. Can't be done. And for me, this is a very liberating awareness. I can still look at and engage with conceptual frameworks. I can look at Buddhist philosophy and Madhyamaka and all the intricacies of emptiness and how we define it, and awareness and how we define it. But I know, like, ultimately, those things are irrelevant. They don't make any difference to me, because they don't provide the view and the experience of direct, naked reality that I can get just by being right where I am. But I couldn't have gotten to where I am, to being able to appreciate naked reality and my naked self, without the help of all of those structures that taught me and brought me to this point. So just like everything else is empty and it also appears, so these teachings, the Dharma itself, in all of its aspects, it doesn't have an independent standalone reality. It's empty, and yet it appears. It doesn't have a solidly existing independent structure, and yet we can relate to it. We can benefit from it. We can open our hearts to it, and we can receive teachings from it. We can receive these teachings from a teacher in a qualified lineage. We can do it through books. We can go on YouTube and Instagram and connect with spiritual teachers who are disseminating this wisdom. We can connect eventually to our own inner guru as the source of our teachings, and we can learn from our mind itself. And when we're doing that, and we have the understanding that the external world is also our mind, then the external world becomes our teacher, and we become enveloped in a continuum of wisdom that is ever unfolding and ever deepening and ever more radiant, while we ourselves are centered in this awareness of an unchanging, stainless, luminous, vibrant, joyful, naked awareness that is at play in the fields of appearances. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it.